I thought I had loved once, maybe twice if I counted the relationship I stayed in out of habit. But at 53, I'd made peace with the idea that romance wasn't meant for me anymore. Then Russell moved into the apartment next door, and every careful boundary I'd built started crumbling the moment he smiled. Like and subscribe for more stories. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts on second chances in love. I wasn't expecting anyone new that Tuesday morning in October. The building on Magnolia Avenue in Fort Worth had the same quiet rhythm it had kept for years. Mrs. Chen on the third floor watered her plants at 7. The couple in 2B left for their morning run at 6:30. I made coffee, read the news, and headed to work at the water treatment facility where I'd spent the last 18 years as an operations supervisor. Routine felt safe. Routine didn't ask questions or demand vulnerability. So when I came home that evening and saw the moving truck parked outside, I felt a strange flutter of something I couldn't name. Curiosity, maybe, or the faint unease that comes when change arrives uninvited. The man directing two movers wore faded jeans and a gray Henley that fit him well enough to notice. He had dark hair starting to silver at the temples, and when he glanced up and caught me looking, he smiled. "Hey there," he called. "I'm Russell. Just moving into 3C, right next door to me, of course." "Welcome," I said, keeping my tone polite but not too warm. "I'm Vic, 3D. Nice to meet you, Vic." His voice had a slight rasp to it, like he'd spent years talking over machinery or music. "Hope we won't be too loud getting settled." "You're fine," I said, and I meant to leave it at that. But something made me add, "Let me know if you need anything." His smile widened just slightly. "I'll keep that in mind." I unlocked my door and slipped inside, telling myself the warmth in my chest was nothing. Just neighborly politeness, nothing more. But that night I lay awake longer than usual, listening to the muffled sounds of furniture being arranged, footsteps crossing the floor, the low hum of a voice I couldn't quite make out. And I wondered who Russell was, what brought him here, why he was alone. I told myself it didn't matter. Over the next few days I saw him in passing. In the hallway, at the mailboxes, once at the little corner market on Fairmount where I picked up groceries after work. Each time we exchanged pleasantries. Each time I felt that same inexplicable pull. He worked as a technical editor for an energy sector trade journal, he mentioned one morning while we waited for the elevator. Mostly remote, but he traveled occasionally for conferences. He'd moved from Lubbock after a job change and wanted to be closer to the city. I told him I worked in water operations, that I'd lived in Fort Worth most of my life, that I liked the quiet. What I didn't tell him was that I'd been in a relationship for nearly 12 years that ended 4 years ago. That my ex, Greg, had been kind but ultimately incompatible in ways we both ignored until we couldn't anymore. That since then I'd gone on exactly 3 dates, all of which felt like obligations I was relieved to escape. I didn't tell him I'd started to believe I was better off alone. But then Russell started showing up in my thoughts at odd moments. While I reviewed treatment reports, while I made dinner, while I sat on my narrow balcony in the evenings, looking out at the lights of downtown. It wasn't anything he did exactly. He was just friendly, warm in a way that felt genuine. He laughed easily, and when he listened, he really listened. One Saturday morning in late October, I ran into him at the building's shared courtyard. He was sitting on one of the benches with a book and a thermos of coffee, and when he saw me, he waved me over. "Join me?" he asked. I hesitated, but only for a second. "Sure." We sat there for over an hour, talking about nothing and everything. Books we'd read, places we'd been, The strange charm of Fort Worth's mix of cowboy heritage and modern sprawl. He told me about growing up in a small town outside Amarillo. I told him about my younger sister in Dallas, who I saw a few times a year but never felt entirely close to. It was easy. Too easy. And when he looked at me, something in his eyes made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. As the weeks passed, those moments multiplied. We started having coffee together on weekend mornings. He'd knock on my door or I'd knock on his, and we'd sit in the courtyard or on one of our balconies and just talk. Sometimes we watched old movies in his apartment. He had a projector set up and a decent sound system, and he introduced me to films I'd never heard of. I started looking forward to those evenings more than I wanted to admit. But there was a complication I hadn't anticipated. A complication named Darren. Darren had been in my life for about 8 months. We weren't serious exactly. We'd met through a mutual acquaintance and started seeing each other casually. Dinner once a week, maybe twice. Occasional texts. It was pleasant and uncomplicated, and I liked that it didn't demand too much. But it also didn't feel like much of anything. Still, I hadn't ended it. I told myself there was no reason to. We were both adults. We both understood what this was. Except now, sitting across from Russell in the golden autumn light, I wasn't sure I understood anything anymore. One evening in early November, Russell asked me about my life. Really asked. We were on his balcony drinking wine he'd brought back from a conference in Houston, and he said, "You don't talk about yourself much. Vic, I feel like I'm always the one going on." "You're not," I said, deflecting. "Okay, then tell me something real." His tone was gentle but insistent. "What's your life like? What makes you happy?" I thought about it longer than I should have. I don't know if I've thought about it that way in a long time. Maybe you should. The sincerity in his voice cracked something open in me. And before I could stop myself, I said, "I think I've spent a lot of years just going through the motions. Work, home, repeat. I had a long relationship that didn't work out. Since then, I've tried to keep things simple. But simple started feeling like empty somewhere along the way." Russell didn't say anything right away. He just looked at me, and in that look I felt understood. "I get that," he said finally. "I was with someone for 15 years. Married even. It ended about 3 years ago. Not badly, just done. And I thought that was it for me, you know. That I'd had my chance and it didn't work, so why keep trying?" "What changed?" I asked. He smiled, soft and a little sad. "I'm still figuring that out." We sat in silence for a while, and I realized with startling clarity that I was falling for him. That maybe I'd been falling for him since the day he moved in, and I had absolutely no idea what to do about it. The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my chest. I couldn't keep pretending this was just friendship, but I also couldn't ignore the fact that I was technically still seeing Darren. It felt dishonest. To both of them. To myself. I called Darren that afternoon. We met for coffee at a place on Berry Street, and I told him the truth as kindly as I could. That I didn't think we were going anywhere. That I didn't want to waste his time. He took it well. "Better than I deserved, probably. I kind of figured," he said with a shrug. "You've seemed distracted lately." "I'm sorry. Don't be." "It's fine, Vic, really." He smiled, and it was genuine. "I hope you find what you're looking for." I left feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because I'd done the right thing. Heavier because now there was nothing standing between me and the terrifying possibility of being honest with Russell. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. Instead, I did what I always did. I buried myself in work. I took on extra shifts. I avoided the courtyard and stayed in my apartment in the evenings, even when I heard Russell's door open and close. He knocked once, 3 days after I ended things with Darren. I didn't answer. He knocked again the next evening. This time I opened the door. Hey, he said, concern flickering in his eyes. You okay? I haven't seen you around. Yeah, I lied. Just busy. Too busy for coffee? I wanted to say no. I wanted to close the door and protect myself from whatever this was becoming. But instead I said, give me 5 minutes. We went to the courtyard. It was a cool evening in mid-November, the air crisp and smelling faintly of wood smoke. Russell handed me a cup of coffee he'd already made, and we sat on the bench we'd claimed as ours. You're avoiding me? He said after a while. I'm not. Vic. He turned to face me. Talk to me. And there it was. The opening I'd been terrified of. I set the cup down and took a breath. I ended things with someone I was seeing. It wasn't serious, but it felt wrong to keep it going when I wasn't really present. Russell was quiet for a long moment. Because of me? I met his eyes. Yeah. The silence stretched between us, fragile and electric. I didn't know you were seeing anyone, he said softly. It wasn't something I advertised. And like I said, it wasn't serious. But I didn't want to keep pretending. Pretending what? That I didn't have feelings for you. The words hung in the air, and I felt simultaneously exposed and free. Russell's expression shifted. Something softened. Something opened. Vic, he said, and his voice was rough now. I've been trying not to say anything because I didn't want to assume. Didn't want to push. But I feel it too. I have for weeks. My heart hammered in my chest. Then why didn't you say something? Because I'm 51 years old and I've made enough mistakes to know that just because you feel something doesn't mean it's the right thing to act on. He paused. But I think this is. He reached for my hand, tentative, and I let him take it. I don't know how to do this, I admitted. It's been so long since I let myself want something like this. Same, he said. But maybe we figure it out together. I didn't answer with words. I just nodded, and he smiled. And we sat there holding hands like two teenagers who didn't know what came next but were willing to find out. Over the next few weeks, we took things slow. Dinners at his place or mine. Long walks along the Trinity River Trail. A trip to the Kimball Art Museum where we spent hours wandering the galleries, talking about nothing and everything. He kissed me for the first time in early December on my balcony under a cold, clear sky. It was gentle and unhurried, and when he pulled back, he looked at me with such tenderness that I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. But hope is a fragile thing, and doubt has a way of creeping in. One night, lying in his bed after we'd spent the evening watching a documentary about river ecosystems, his choice. To humor my work, I found myself staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. What are you thinking? Russell asked, his voice drowsy. That I don't know how to trust this. He shifted, propping himself up on one elbow. Trust what? That it's real. That it'll last. That I won't mess it up. Vic. He touched my face, turning me toward him. We're both going to mess up. That's part of it. But that doesn't mean it's not real. How do you know? Because I've never felt this kind of peace with anyone before. And I think you feel it too. He was right. I did. But peace didn't erase fear. It just made it easier to face. Winter settled over Fort Worth, mild by most standards, but enough to make the evenings feel cozy. Russell and I fell into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar. We cooked together. We read on the couch, his feet tucked under my legs. We argued good-naturedly about movies and politics, and whether the city's new water conservation initiatives went far enough. I introduced him to my sister over a video call. She lived in Dallas with her husband and 2 kids, and while we'd never been especially close, she seemed genuinely happy for me. "He seems good for you," she said later, when Russell had left the room to take a work call. "You look lighter." I hadn't realized how heavy I'd been carrying myself until she said it. Russell introduced me to his best friend, a woman named Trish who lived in Austin and made the drive up one Saturday in January. She was sharp and funny and clearly protective of him, but by the end of the day she pulled me aside and said, "You make him happy. Don't screw it up. I promised I'd try." But trying meant vulnerability. It meant letting him see the parts of me I usually kept hidden. The insecurities, the old wounds, the fear that I wasn't enough. One night in late January, after a particularly long day at work where a treatment system malfunction had kept me at the plant until nearly midnight, I came home exhausted and brittle. Russell was waiting in the hallway holding a container of soup he'd made. "Thought you might be hungry," he said. I should have been grateful. I should have smiled and thanked him. But instead I snapped, "I don't need you to take care of me, Russell." He blinked, taken aback. "I know you don't. I just wanted to help. I'm fine. You don't seem fine." "Well, I am." I unlocked my door, eager to retreat. "I just need some space." He didn't push. He just nodded and went back to his apartment, and I stood there in my kitchen feeling like an idiot. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed replaying the conversation, hating myself for pushing him away, when all he'd done was care. The next morning I knocked on his door. He answered in his pajamas, hair sticking up, looking sleepy and beautiful. "I'm sorry," I said before he could speak. "I was tired and stressed and I took it out on you." "That wasn't fair." He stepped aside to let me in. "You're allowed to have bad days, Vic." "I know. But I'm not good at letting people help me. I've spent so long being self-sufficient that I forget it's okay to lean on someone." "Then learn." His voice was gentle, "because I'm not going anywhere." We stood there in his kitchen, the morning light streaming through the window, and I realized that for the first time in my life, I actually believed someone when they said that. The months that followed weren't perfect. We had disagreements, moments of friction, times when old habits threatened to pull us back into self-protection. But we worked through them. We talked, we listened, we chose each other even when it was hard. In March, we took a long weekend trip to Big Bend National Park. We hiked the trails, camped under stars so thick they looked unreal, and talked about the future in a way that felt both thrilling and terrifying. "I want this to be permanent," Russell said one night as we sat by the fire. "I know it's only been a few months, but I know what I feel." "And I think you do too," I did. I'd known for a while. "I want that too," I said. Yeah. He leaned over and kissed me, and in that moment, I felt something I'd thought I'd lost forever. A sense of home. By the time summer arrived, we'd started talking about combining our apartments or finding a new place together, something with more space. Maybe a small house in Fairmount or the near South Side with a yard where we could sit outside in the evenings. It felt right. All of it. One evening in late June, we were sitting on my balcony watching the sun set over the city. The air was warm, the sky streaked with pink and orange, and Russell reached over and took my hand. "You know what I've been thinking?" he said. "What?" "That I spent a lot of years thinking my life was already written. That the best parts were behind me. But I was wrong." I squeezed his hand. "Me too." "I'm glad you didn't answer the door that one time I knocked," he said with a grin. I'm glad you knocked again. We sat there in comfortable silence, and I thought about how much had changed, how much I'd changed, how I'd gone from someone who believed he was done with love to someone who'd found it in the most unexpected place, right next door. Russell shifted closer, resting his head on my shoulder. I love you, Vic. It was the first time he'd said it outright, though I'd felt it for weeks. I love you too, I said, and I meant it with everything I had. We stayed there until the stars came out, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt certain about the future, not because it would be easy or without challenges, but because I wasn't facing it alone. I'd thought my heart had retired, that I'd used up my capacity